So what I'm building today is a leather vessel, and leather vessels go back a long ways. We're not quite sure how far back, and so a wee bit of history about them. You may have noticed that I always preface my stories with a wee bit of history, because that's all we'll ever know. If we're thinking about military campaigns, it's always written by the victor. If we think about how we're taught history in the academia world, we only get one side of it often. And I often kind of imagine if the indigenous people on this continent had a written language at the time of European contact, I should say, how much more vast our knowledge would be of how things evolved, relationships, how actual battles took place. But anyway, that is lost to history. So whenever I talk about history, it is in fact a wee bit of it. Anyway, the leather vessel. One of the earlier ones I found, and I'm sure they date back a lot further, was this is 10th century, and the Bishop of Canterbury made reference to leather vessels, and the name pot. So they called them leather pots. In fact, it doesn't come from the word pottery, as you might imagine. It actually comes from a vessel that will hold potable water. So there's a wee bit of history there that kind of fascinates me. Anyway, so what I'm making today, I'm trying to reproduce something that I made, I must have made this 10 years ago, but it's my shot pouch. And it's held up really well. So it contains my shot for small game hunting, waterfowl hunting, and I'm building one here for a friend. I'm going to gift this to a good friend of mine. Anyway, if I was making, if we think about what they used them for, they had pails, they had buckets, they used them for cups, they had tankards for drinking ale in the taverns. But one of the most common things, particularly on the frontier in the Americas, was called the custrel. What we know today as the canteen. So if I was making a canteen, the only difference when I'm finished this project would be I would line the inside of it with molten beeswax and keep pouring it out until I seal up all my stitching. But because it only has to hold shot, I don't have to worry about that part of the process. But aside from that, everything's the same. So I've got two pieces of leather. I've punched them out instead of using my awl. I thought that would be a fun project this time around. And now I'm going to get down to the stitching. So when I'm making any of my historical accoutrements, I use waxed Irish linen. I notice a lot of people use artificial sinew. Problem is it's nylon, and as the sun gets on it, it'll fade the dye out of it, and it looks like fish line when it's done. But Irish linen was a product that was readily available in the 17th and 18th century, and if you use it, it's not going to fade on you, and it is a very authentic way of trying to recreate the items that they would have used on the frontier in the 1700s. So I start off with just a basic whip stitch. It's sort of in and out, which is going to leave a gap between each stitch. It's not a saddle stitch. And then when I'm finished, I'm going to go back and I'm going to actually, so you can see I've done the whip stitch along here. And then I'm going to go back and do a cross stitch along the whole way. Now, it needs a bit of strength because shot's heavy, and we don't want that to let go, but I don't have to worry about waterproof and lead shot. So there's an old saying, too many irons in the fire, and it's a blacksmith term. So to increase productivity, a blacksmith would, let's say he was making S-hooks for fire cranes. He would have maybe 20 or 30 pieces of iron in the forge at one time, and he could just go from one to the next. But if he had too many irons in the fire, every time he was doing a heat, he'd actually melt the steel, and steel was too valuable to do that. So I have too many irons in the fire because I got way too many projects going, but I've decided to start finishing them. So I finished a little ball bag here, and essentially what I've done is I've made this out of brain tan deer hide. I used a deer antler here to, I bored out the center of the deer antler, made a little wooden plug for it, and then I dyed the bag with walnut shells, and it'll hold about a dozen or so round balls that I cast for my muskets. Anyway, so that's the project finished. That's one iron I got out of the fire right there. Get him out of the way and get on to the one that I started the other day. And I'm just about finished stitching this guy up. I got a couple of stitches to do, and then we get on to the fun part. Okay, that guy's all stitched up. So, looks, if you get a closer look here, you can see I've got these really nice little cross stitches along here. It's going to make a really strong pouch because it's got to hold quite a bit of lead, I should say. And so it's rather a flat, unappealing looking thing right now. But so we build birch bark canoes, and when you build them either on the ground on a sandy area that's flat, or on a building bench. But before you drive the ribs in, it's just this flat looking punt thing, and then there's this beautiful transformation. So we're going to get this thing in some water. I'm cooking up here, and we're going to get this packed up here and give it some shape. So this time of year, one doesn't have to go far to get water, but sometimes you gotta make it. But I'm going to get this, I don't want this boiling, but I want the water fairly warm to, we want to totally soak the leather so it'll take its form. That should be adequate water. We'll get that heated up. So I'm going to, once I get the leather pouch wet here, I'm going to be using sand to pack it to give it its shape. But often I use rice. But I've made this particular pouch for birdshot, so it's a pretty small opening I've made in it. But it's just a wee bit of history about rice. So I try to do as much research as I can to be as authentic as possible when I'm doing living history. And I was once challenged at an event when I was cooking up a pot of rice, and somebody said, surely they didn't have rice in this part of the world in that time period. And we think of rice as an Asian crop. But rice was first experimented, a fellow by the name of Dr. Henry Woodward in 1685, experiments with the first rice in South Carolina. And it's successful. He's able to grow it. Now they rely on rainwater and ponds to grow it in. But, and sadly, this is where the slave trade becomes very prominent in the Americas, and it's a very labor-intensive crop. So with the use of African Americans, they're able to significantly increase their productivity. So it goes, they're shipping by 1700, they're shipping, and that's only 15 years after it was first planted, they're shipping about 400,000 pounds. They're exporting that much. and I'm consuming probably an equivalent amount in the Americas. By 1710, and only 10 short years later, they're producing 1.5 million pounds annually. And by 1720, they're producing 20 million pounds. So by 1750, the growers realize that they can use the tidal waters, because as the tide comes in, it pushes fresh water back up. So through a series of gates and levees, they're able to flood massive acreages for the growing of rice. But their innovation doesn't stop there. So around 1780 or so, this fellow named Jonathan Lucas, he invents a tidal-powered rice mill. And essentially it uses a pestle mortar method of pounding the rice to get the outer shell off. And he's able to produce 100 barrels a day. So in that time period, a barrel of rice had 162 pounds in it. And Louisiana is still a big grower of rice to this very day, and that measurement is still used to this day, 162 pounds. But to show how it grew from there, by 1780 in South Carolina and Georgia, they were growing approximately 80 million pounds of rice. About half of that consumed in the colonies, and about half of that exported, most of it to England. Anyway, I think my water's about done here, and we're going to transform this bag into something real pretty. Okay, that that's pretty much done. And kind of a neat little shape. And as I mentioned at the onset, if I wanted to make a canteen, obviously it would be bigger and it would have a bigger opening. But essentially that's a canteen. It just has to be waterproofed on the inside with beeswax. Some people used brewer's pitch as well in the wooden vessels of the time period. But when I sit here and it's evening and I got lots of time and sitting and enjoying the fire, I think about our modern world and how kids sometimes get a lot of enjoyment out of some of these simple things, like a simple project like this. So my wife Kathy actually took two of my granddaughters who were our granddaughters who were visiting, and she taught them to knit. And they were absolutely blown away by the experience. So they knitted a scarf. Well, at least got a good start on it. I think they finished it. Hope they finished it at home. Anyway, yeah, the simple things in life. So where I'm at now with this is I got to let that dry. I'm going to put it by the fire here, and we'll let that dry overnight. In the morning, I'll be able to knock out the sand, and I'll have a hard vessel like this guy over here that I sort of replicated. And the next step in this, I got to punch a couple of holes through the lanyard, and I got to get out my Inkle loom, and I'm going to weave a strap for it, and I'm going to gift this to a good friend. I'll give this a coat of dye as well to make it look a little more original, and that project will be done. I have the shot pouch done. It's dried now, and all I got to do is knock the sand out of that, put a wee bit of dye on it, and it's ready to go. So I'm working on the sash to hold it, and I'm using an Inkle loom. Won't go into a lot of depth. I did cover sort of a tutorial on how to use an Inkle loom earlier, but just quickly, what I've done with the cordage, it's called the warp, and basically there's a long row and there's a short row. The long rows each get a treadle, which you see here, and this is called the treadle pin. So what it does, it allows me to push up one of the untreadled parts, pull it down, pass my shuttle, which I've woven through the weave. The shuttle has a sharpened edge and it has a rounded edge. So I load it by using a figure of 8, and that allows me to keep the pointed edge clear of material, which it's called beating. So once I've got the line in, I beat that line cordage down into the weave that I'm trying to create. So with the treadles, it allows me to literally push one down through the ones that have a treadle on, put a finger in, separate the two weaves, bring it back, pass my shuttle through the opposite direction. Once I'm through that, I beat it, push up, bring back the untreadled row of the warp, and put the shuttle through the opposite direction. I've chosen a really simple pattern. I think in the 1700s, either due to resources or they just like things simple, they kept it that way. So I'm trying to recreate what they would have made and would have had at the time period. Anyway, I've got a ways to go. I need about 4 feet, roughly 4 feet, for my friend's shot pouch there, and we'll be done another project. So the Inkle loom I'm using here, I built it just out of some scrap stuff I had laying around. Probably don't have $1 in it. I like it because it's simple. It only has one moving part, which is my tensioner back here. And I'm going to demonstrate a couple of passes here. So what I've brought up now is the untreadled, or the shorter part of the warp. I'm going to pass my tool through. I'm going to bring it down. I like to give it a little pinch where it goes through. And I'm going to bring the sharpened edge of the shuttle down, and I'm going to beat that in like so. And then I bring up, push down the untreadled part, bring up the treadled line, and go back through for the next pass. Get it uniform, give it a little pinch, and then beat that into place. Okay, turned out pretty good. It's nice and hard. I'll get a little dye on that tonight and finish up the sling for it on the Inkle loom, and it'll be ready to go. So when you think winter's over, Mother Nature had other plans. And last night we got one heck of a dump of snow. And maple sap was running, running quite good, in fact. And well, she's all froze up again today. It's quite cold. Anyway, it's given me an opportunity to finish my shot bag. So I got the dye on it. I took an old broken ramrod, which I'm going to use for a stopper for it. Finished the sash on the, or sling on the Inkle loom, and I sewed some brain tan deer hide on for the gussets, and yeah, tie this guy on, and this project's done.